Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in from across the continent and beyond. We've got folks in Nicaragua, Canada, the States, Saudi Arabia today. So wherever you're joining from on this planet, welcome here to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you are catching us during a truly epic and fun week. We've got dino people, space people. My wife's coming on tomorrow to talk about AI. We've got a whole bevy of incredible broadcasts. You can check them all out on our YouTube channel. But particularly, we're excited today with our topic du jour. Now, we do have a Kahoot today, but my computer did a crazy thing while I was trying to bring it up a second ago. So I'll get you all the game pins in the chat in just a minute. But we will have a 4-question quiz between our talk and Q&A. So stay tuned for that in just a little bit. But today, we are welcoming back one of my very favorite researchers of all time, Dr. Tim Lamont. He's joining us live in the UK, and let's put it this way, professional intro out the window. I get to work with some of the coolest people on planet Earth. I've done 1,700 broadcasts. There's only been like 4 or 5 times that someone has said something they do in science that my jaw was actually dropped in the background, and Tim is one of those people. So today, he's going to talk about some super, super cool work, understanding and restoring coral reefs. You're going to be blown away, I promise you, and that's what I'm going to tease for you. So with that, Tim, thank you so much for joining us again, and welcome back to the program, man.
Thank you. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. Really excited to share some of what we do today, and then to hear people's questions and to talk about coral reefs and why, despite all the bad news stories you hear about coral reefs, there's hope for them and they're worth fighting for.
They certainly are. Well, I'm going to zip it and leave you to take us away. You are good to go, man.
Thank you very much. Really looking forward to this. And as we start, I wonder if people can find the live chat. And while I do a bit of an introduction, let us know where you're watching from. It would be great to hear where you're coming from. Where are you today?
Yeah, we've got the Water Rockers in Guelph. We've got Georgetown, Ontario. So a couple Ontario classes in the chat. We've got Caesar in Nicaragua, our biggest fan who comes to every broadcast we do. So welcome in, Caesar. We got some of our folks from Rhode Island in too. So we keep pouring in, but our good start with our American, Canadian, and Nicaraguan friends today.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much. I'll introduce myself and tell you where I'm. So I'm talking to you from the UK at the moment. But as my job, I'm a marine biologist. And I have the privilege and the excitement of being able to work in lots of different places around the world and meet some of the world's most charismatic and crazy animals. So here are just a couple of the underwater encounters that I've been having over recent years. So in the top left there, that's a whale shark. That's the biggest fish in the ocean. In the top right, that's quite an inquisitive potato cod. You can see she's pregnant, that potato cod, and she wanted to come over and check out whatever I was holding in my hand. In the bottom left, that's a sea turtle, green sea turtle. They can hold their breath for about 7 hours, which is quite a lot longer than I can hold mine for. And then in the bottom right, that's a dolphin here in the UK. So my job allows me to go and understand more about and work out how we can protect some of these amazing animals. It takes me to lots of amazing places as well. So here's some pictures of working in different places in Mexico on the left, underwater in Australia at the bottom, some very cold places, that's up in the Arctic Ocean at the top, and some warm places as well. Today we're going to be talking about tropical coral reefs. So I wonder if any of you can throw in the chat, throw out some countries that you know have coral reefs. Which countries have coral reefs?
I love that you ask this every time, and we get some of the same answers every single time. So I'm curious what people say. Australia coming in the chat. Yes, Australia is the one that I think most people know. I think the Great Barrier Reef has really permeated public understanding and consciousness. That's fantastic. We've got Nicaragua from our folks in Nicaragua. Fantastic. Hawaii to the United States. So these are some of the classics. I've seen some coral reefs off Hawaii, which is very cool. Florida. So again, the United States, but on the opposite coast. So a bit of the US, a bit of Australia, but I think we've got some more treats in store as you share some of your stories, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have coral reefs. They run in a band around the whole world, and anywhere at a tropical latitude, there's loads of countries with coral reefs, and we'll explore some stories from a couple of them today. So first off, let's talk about what exactly is a coral, because a surprising number of people don't actually know what a coral is, and I think they're amazing little animals. So they're tiny little microscopic animals, but in a sense, they're part animal, part plant, part mineral. And that's because they're an animal that forms what we call a symbiosis. And that's like a partnership this animal teams up with a plant, specifically with a tiny little microscopic plant called a zooxanthellae. And so you can think of the coral animal as being a little bit like a jellyfish, really. That's, you know, its relationship is probably it's closest to a jellyfish. But it's a jellyfish that spends most of its life upside down with its tentacles waving about above it in the water. And it has loads of these zooxanthellae, these little plants, inside the body of the animal. And they work together in this symbiotic relationship. The animal collects food out of the water with its tentacles, and the plant photosynthesizes and makes energy from sunlight. And together they form this coral. And then the other cool trick that the coral can do is it can literally make rock. So it takes minerals out of the water and it uses them to create this calcium carbonate skeleton. And that's what makes the reef below the coral. So it's like an animal which works together with a plant to create a mineral or to create rocks. I just think they're really cool. And then these corals are what we call colonial animals. And that means that loads of them live together. And they all cram in together, and then you can see that there. So there's my sort of homemade diagram of coral on the left. On the right, that's a photograph of a real coral, and you can see those tentacles. And what gives it that yellowy color in the middle, that's the plant cells. That's the zooxanthellae. And then these corals make lots of different shapes and sizes and colors. So this is a picture of a coral reef where you've got lots of different types of coral, all with different shapes and sizes, but functionally they all sort of work like that diagram on the left there. So that's what a coral is. One of the things that gets me really excited is, as well as what corals look like, what a coral reef sounds like. And that's because coral reefs have all sorts of amazing animals living on them. And as well as looking amazing, they actually sound amazing. You hear all these weird and wonderful sounds when you swim around on a coral reef. So here's some sound recordings that I've taken over the years of different fishes living on coral reefs. So up first, this one in the top left, this is called an ambon damselfish, and it makes a sound that sounds a bit like this. It's like
an owl almost.
You say an owl, Jesse?
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another one. What do you think this one sounds like, Jesse? What does a sergeant major sound like?
Like a waterfall going over one of those, like if you were washing stuff on one of those ribbed sort of, I don't even know how to explain it, like the wood.
Yeah, like a washboard or something.
There you go.
Nice.
That's the name.
Nice. And then here's one called the reef croaker. So this one lives at the bottom of a reef and it tends to hide away in caves. It's a bit secretive, but you hear it quite a lot and it makes this sound.
A bullfrog underwater.
Yeah, that's basically a bullfrog underwater, isn't it? So it makes that sort of very low-pitched pulsing sound. And then the clownfish, the nose-striped clownfish, it bangs its teeth together and it makes this sound. I don't know about you, but my teeth would really hurt if I made that sound by banging them together. But that's how the nose-striped clownfish, that's how they talk to each other. So together, all of those sounds create what we call the coral reef soundscape. And there's all these sort of weird and wonderful other sounds, and it's chaos down there. There's a very, very noisy place. There's lots of different sounds. Now, a lot of coral reefs, as you'll have heard, are damaged, and are damaged increasingly by climate change related threats. And two of those big threats are cyclones and coral bleaching. So here's a picture on the left of a reef that's been very badly damaged by a cyclone. Really high winds and high waves have come through and smashed all the coral to bits, and left a big old rubble field of degraded coral reefs. And then on the right, you've got a picture of coral bleaching. And that's where this sort of symbiotic relationship, this teaming up between the animal and the plant that I talked about before, that relationship breaks down. The plant no longer lives inside the coral animal. It leaves the coral turns completely white and is unable to make any energy from sunlight anymore. So that process is coral bleaching. It happens when the water gets too warm, when you have a heat wave, and you get problematic coral bleaching, which ultimately leads to coral death. So there are big problems facing coral reefs, and that means that as marine biologists and as marine scientists, we have a challenge to try and understand how to best rebuild these coral reef ecosystems. So here's some more pictures of degraded reefs, and you can see why that these ecosystems need a hand to be rebuilt. So one of the partnerships I work in is I work with a brilliant scientist called Dr. Trias Razak. Her picture's on the left there. And we work together in Indonesia. Indonesia is a country in Southeast Asia, and it's the country in the world which has more coral reefs than any other country in the world. So Indonesia has thousands and thousands of square kilometers of coral reef, around 14,000 islands. So it's like, in some ways, it's like the center of the world for coral reefs. There's loads and loads of reefs. And what there are also loads and loads of programs where people are trying to understand how to repair and rebuild reefs. So you can see this news headline here: Indonesia leads the way in restoring coral reefs. Indonesia really is a world expert in restoring coral reefs. And we work there to do some research trying to understand the impacts of these projects that are trying to rebuild reefs. So here's an example of one of them, which is run by a company called Mars Sustainable Solutions. They take these metal frames that you can see, they cover them in sand, and then they tie little tiny fragments of coral to these frames. They then swim the frames down to the bottom of the seabed, and they tie them all together there. So they make this big sort of metal scaffolding structure with tiny little bits of coral over them. And the coral grows over the years. So 2 or 3 years later, you can barely see any metal frames. You can just see coral as far as the eye can see. It's a really encouraging program which demonstrates that even when reefs are damaged, if you can control the environment, stop what was harming the reef, and then help to replant the reefs, just like you can replant plants in your garden, you can replant corals underwater. I find it a really encouraging program to work on, and it's really great to be working in collaboration with scientists in Indonesia to understand how more people can rebuild reefs like that. So that's how you can regrow the coral. But in another experiment we did in Australia, we asked the question, well, how can you bring fish back to a reef? If the reef's been damaged and all the fish have gone away, then you replant the coral and you grow the coral back, but how can you get the fish to come back? And we thought the answer might lie in these sounds that I was playing before. So you remember all these weird and wonderful fish sounds? Well, it turns out they don't just sound weird and wonderful to us. It turns out that fish are really attracted by the sounds of other fish as well. So what we did is we thought, well, what if you could play the sounds of a healthy coral reef to attract fish back to an area that you were rebuilding and restoring? So that's me swimming along there on that picture. And in my hand, you can see I'm holding what is an underwater loudspeaker. So those are the same loudspeakers that they use when they do synchronized swimming competitions, so that the swimmers can hear the music underwater in a swimming pool. So we bought some of those loudspeakers, but instead of playing music, we played the sound of a healthy coral reef with lots of sounds of fish and all the busy sounds you'd expect on a reef. And we played that, and then we compared how many fish turned up to coral reefs where we played that sound compared to when we didn't play any sounds, when we just left it as quiet in the ocean. And here's the graph of our results. So when we didn't play any sounds and we just left it as a quiet open ocean, we got about 25 fish coming back. But when we played the sounds, we called that acoustic enrichment, and we got twice as many fish coming back to those reefs. It's a really encouraging proof.
We froze Tim for a second. That's okay. We're going to get Tim back. Maybe the fish didn't want us to know this cool science. But this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning of the broadcast. It's one of my very favorite things. We're going to get Tim back in just a quick second, and then we should be all set. Let's see. Tim, I think you're back. We're back. We're good. Great. You were just telling us the main thing. I think the fish, I said, I think the fish didn't want us to know maybe how cool it was.
Yeah. So this is what we found is when you play the noises of fish on these restoration sites, you get twice as many fish attracted towards them and twice as many fish coming back. So it's a really encouraging example of how by understanding a little bit more about an ecosystem, by understanding new ways that you can sort of alter ecosystems and provide a helping hand to nature, then we can discover new ways in which we can help rebuild nature that's been damaged. I think that's really encouraging thing to do. It's something that really motivates me and really inspires me. And so let me just give you a little summary before we go into a quiz about everything we've talked about today. So coral reefs are fantastically colorful, diverse, wonderful places full of all sorts of animals and amazing things to see. At the heart of the coral reef ecosystem is this amazing animal, the coral, which is actually a symbiotic relationship between an animal and an algae. Those reefs can be really damaged and are often really damaged by events like cyclones and events like coral bleaching. But there are fantastic programs around the world where people are working together to try and understand both how you can replant and recover coral, and also how you can call fish back into these ecosystems to rebuild the whole system. Thanks very much for listening. Looking forward to the quiz and more than happy to take any of your questions.
Tim, again, we get to work with a lot of really cool people, but I think you actually do have the best job in the world. It looks like a lot of fun. You clearly love it. And how amazing to get to do something like that, where you're having a real concrete impact on saving on not just a species, but like an entire habitat. And what I like in this research too, the way I've shared it with my family and friends is like, imagine you go into a hotel and there's no one there and there's no one in the lobby, or a restaurant and it's completely empty and you can't find the cook. Do you really want to stay? No, because it seems like it's dead inside. Same with the coral reef. If you go into a restaurant and everyone's there and they're all happy and there's lots of noise and it's ruckus and exciting, that's where you want to go eat, because clearly it's a place that is well loved and going to be really, really fantastic. So I love that we get to showcase that in the natural world as well. And it's such a neat bit of research. And so let's, as you said, let's dive in with our Kahoot. And then we're going to pepper you with all sorts of cool questions. If you want to come out of screen share, I don't know what your setup is, but I want to make sure you can see us and see what everything's going on. But we'll dive in with this. And if you're new to Kahoot, the faster you answer, the more points you get. Tim's going to help us out with some hints along the way. And what you win is Tim and I's everlasting respect. So that's pretty cool. No pressure. Tim, let's do this thing and dive in with question number 1.
Okay, let's go.
Go. Dun, 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 dun. 3, 2, 1. Our drum roll countdown. Question 1. Tim works on coral reefs in where? Where do we talk about? He talked about his amazing doctor partner. He talked about an amazing sort of hub of coral reef research. Is it in Canada? I wish. Is it in Indonesia? Is it in the UK? Or is it in Hawaii? What do we think? We talked about Hawaii. Maybe it's there. I don't know.
Yeah, this was the place we talked about having the more coral reefs than anywhere else in the world. It's in Southeast Asia.
It is. It's such a special, special spot. And most people nailed it with Indonesia. So Tim is in the UK for those who picked that. But alas, are there cold water reefs off the UK?
There are cold water coral reefs in the UK, but they work slightly differently. Other people work on those reefs. They need a different set of skills.
Yeah, fascinating. And the fact that we know that too, like cold water reefs was not something that I knew about when I was a kid at all. So the fact that that exists is very cool. But Indonesia is a very special spot on this planet. All right. Coral are symbiotic and comprised of partner organisms working together. We talked about what coral are: plant, animal, mineral. What the deal is, Tim? I think you laid it out for us pretty well. But we had no time for hints because they all got their answers in. That almost never happens. Sorry, that's so funny. True, yes, Tim.
That's absolutely right. They're a symbiotic relationship with an animal and a plant working together. It's a really rare and cool thing to happen in biology, and it's one of the most amazing things I think about reefs is that the entire ecosystem is built on this partnership between an animal and a plant.
So cool. Imagine if you could like fuse your cells with like a tree and take in energy from the sun and they could like move around. That would be such a cool partnership. Human tree hybrids coming soon to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants near you. All right. That throws off our lead. Amazon Meerkat takes your lead. Question 3. All right, coral reefs turning white and shedding their zooxanthellae, which is your science term of the day, is called skeletonizing, dying, bleaching, or that never happens. Corals are always colorful no matter what. Tim, what do we think? Hints.
Oh, yeah. No, this is a tricky one. Four answers. Yep. Looks like most people have got it, though.
Got it. This is like the highest ratio of correct answers we've ever had in the history of food. So way to go. Not only are you an amazing scientist, you are a stellar educator, man.
Well, people are really nailing this. It's some great answers. Well done, everyone.
Okay, very close as we go to our final query with true or false. Coral reefs can rejuvenate and thrive if given the chance. Once they're in trouble, are they dead and gone, or can we bring them back with maybe cool things like in this picture? I don't know.
Yeah, this is the the big money answer that lots of people are working on around the world. And yeah, people have got the right answer here. I think it's really important to remember this, that actually, even when coral reefs are damaged, it is not true that it's too late and there's nothing we can do.
It's true. I mean, coral reefs are a really salient, fantastic example of this, but it's worth noting for all ecosystems, land, sea alike, if we give nature the space to thrive, it tends to. Like nature, life finds a way, as they said in Jurassic Park. And so I'm really glad most of you got that. Amazon Meerkat is our winner. Way to go, guys. Thank you very, very much for that. And Tim, we're going to dive in with questions and just inundate you now because that's what it's all about. So Mr. Hancock's class, Georgetown, if you guys want to kick us off with a question, YouTubers, you can put your thinking caps on and share them there as well. But lead in our live Noble class. Hey, guys.
Oh, yes, perfect. We were just enjoying the podium here. Great job with your presentation. We really enjoyed the idea that a very simple solution of having the sounds bring them back. A couple students were wondering how you recorded the sounds.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And it's one we've been working on for the last 5 or 10 years. So you record the sounds using an underwater microphone. It's a special bit of kit that works underwater, and we call it a hydrophone. They used to be very expensive and difficult to get your hands on, hydrophones, but we've been teaming up with engineers and with people who make these hydrophones, and they can now make them for much cheaper, and they can make much more of them much faster. So that's good news for us, because it means now we can listen to more and more coral reefs, and more people can get involved with it.
Super cool. We did a program with World Wildlife Fund fairly recently where it was all about tech in conservation, and the fact that all these tools have gotten so much cheaper and more accessible, whether it's hydrophones, AI, drones, like all of it. It's like this golden age of collecting data and understanding the natural world. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. So thank you, Mr. Hancock, for our first question. Tim, this might have been like a great final question, but it's our first one on YouTube, and our water rockers in Guelph, they want to know, when we travel, how can we help? If someone were to go to a coral reef, what's the first thing that they can do as a student or teacher or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. There's loads of programs around the world now that are combining tourism with efforts to protect and even sometimes rebuild and restore reefs. So it's worth having a search. It depends where you go in the world, but sometimes you'll be able to find volunteer organizations or NGOs who are trying to actively rebuild reefs. And as part of the holiday that you go on, you can go and contribute to that. And then more generally, I think whenever we travel anywhere, it's really important to be mindful of the way in which you travel and the impact that you have as you do so. So things like cleaning up any litter that you see, or traveling in ways that are as sustainable as possible. When you choose where you stay, then maybe staying in places that celebrate and protect the nature around them. You can have a really positive impact on the world wherever you travel, not even just on coral reefs.
Yep. That's a beautiful message. And we're starting to see that with our kids a lot. One of the things we feature in a lot of our programs is to not share selfies of someone holding an animal, because usually those animals are not wanting to be in that situation. So it tends to be an exploitative thing. You can really have some of the most profound natural experiences on this planet without doing something that harms animals either directly or indirectly. So I'm really glad we got that question. Thanks for thinking of that, guys. Tim, a follow-up on this, and I'm going to look this up too. There's a certification. So PADI is the main people that certify divers around the world. And they've got a program now about dive operators that like highlights that they're sustainable. Do you know the name of that offhand? I can track it down, but
yeah, I think it's called Green Fins. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's probably it. So that like we always like to highlight that there are things that you can look for, logos, names, whatever, when you go to places like a dive shop that highlight, okay, they're using the best, most sustainable practices. They're not harming reefs. They're being good to the fish. And so look for those sorts of things when you explore, and you're looking it up too. We'll all look it up together. We'll make sure you have the right name by the end of the broadcast, everybody. Tim, I love this question from Caesar in Nicaragua. Do coral reefs have a mouth? If so, what do they eat?
Yes, that's a great question. So the coral animal we talked about has these tentacles, and it can catch tiny little floating bits of food or tiny little plankton in the sea, and then it can funnel that into its body, through, it's sort of like a mouth. So it can ingest things that way, and they do a bit of eating, and then they get some of their energy from sunlight as well, and that's through this partnership with the zooxanthellae. So they get energy both by eating, like we do, and by photosynthesizing, like plants do.
It's so fantastic. I just love them. They're such a neat animal. They're closest relatives to, again, to highlight this, and you showed pictures, like jellyfish are related to coral, which was one of the coolest things I ever learned when I was about the age of these students. That just blew my mind, okay? You should look at it's basically a coral's an upside down jellyfish. Like, think of it that way. It just anchors itself to a rock and then connects, and it's just, they're so special. Tim, we're going to head back to Mr. Hancock's class for a second question. Come on in again, guys, and take us away.
Hey. Perfect. We got some questions.
We're going to be here for a while.
The question that came up the most often was, what's your favorite fish, and how is that fish doing?
Nice. Yeah, but asking a marine biologist what their favorite fish is like that's a question that causes a lot of thought and a lot of stress. For me, the answer changes quite often, but at the moment, what should we go for? There's a fish I've been doing a lot of research and a lot of work on recently, so I've grown quite fond of it. It's called the 8-banded butterfly fish, and it's a tiny little. It's mostly yellow, and it's got these 8 black stripes that go down the side of it, and it goes around in pairs on a coral reef. And I've been studying exactly what this fish eats, so that we can rebuild ecosystems that better allow fish like that to recover, so that we can make sure we're putting the right food in the ecosystem to allow that fish to thrive. The reason I find it so interesting at the moment is that this island we're working on in Indonesia, usually this 8-banded butterfly fish is a very rare fish. Usually you don't really see it that often at all. And then just around this one island, there are just loads of them. They're all over the place. And so we're still not quite sure why there's so many of them there, but we're trying to find out. And maybe I'll be able to tell you on our next lesson.
And it wants to let me in. There I am. Good. My computer hates me today. That's okay. Something has to go a little wrong in every video broadcast. I'm bringing up a picture of an 8-banded butterfly fish right now, so you can take a look at these guys. But they're a special creature. They remind me of something that I used to see all the time when I was at Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto. So we have some of these guys in some of the reef tanks, and they're just a special, beautiful fish. Good pick, Tim.
They're beautiful. They move very quickly around the reef. So when you're looking for them, swimming around, you just see this flash of yellow, and then you're like, go there.
Quick follow-up on that. Can you catch fish? Like, if you got fins on, can you outswim the fish or no?
It depends what fish. Some fish are quite slow, and you would be able to catch them, but most fish are much quicker than you are. Yep. And it's not so much the speed of the fish that's the problem. It's the agility of the fish, because they react very quickly, and they're used to living in this very complex coral reef environment where there's lots of holes and nooks and crannies and corners. So they're just world experts at being able to turn corners really quickly and dart in every single which way direction, and they'll get away from you that way.
We've got a great follow-up to this. When did you learn to dive, and where was your first dive? And I'm going to follow this up with a cool thing for all our kids in a minute, but what's your dive story, Tim?
Nice. Yeah. So I learned to swim at a very young age, and then I learned to snorkel when I was maybe about 9 or 10. So that was my first experience of being able to explore the underwater world, and explore coral reefs and lakes and rivers, and anywhere I could put a snorkel mask on, I was good to go from about the age of 9 or 10. And then I learned to scuba dive when I was about 19 or 20. I was working as a research assistant in a university program. And I went and carried all the equipment, swam behind someone who was doing his research, and I was just carrying the kit. So that was when I learned to scuba dive, and then I've gone from there.
Very, very cool. Now, you probably have a higher certification than I do, but I want to highlight for our students, when you are 8 years old, you can start with something called PADI Bubble Maker. So PADI, again, is the place that certifies divers all around the world. At 8, you can start and go in a pool and put the gear in and check it out. And at 10 years old, which a lot of our audience is today, you can become a diver like Tim and like me, much less so than Tim. Even if you're in the heart of a continent, if you're in Iowa, Saskatchewan, you can go to quarries, pools, whatever, and learn to dive. It's one of the most amazing experiences on this planet. Maybe you don't get to go to places quite as cool as Tim, but like 70% of the world is now open to you in a way that it does not if you have a scuba diving license. So you can attest to this. It's like one of the most amazing things you can do on planet Earth.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic experience. And I teach some of those courses. I teach some people on the open water course, and Yeah, it's an amazing thing for people to experience for the first time, because you first of all, you experience almost total weightlessness when you're just swimming around under the water, and it's like you're floating or flying around sometimes. And then you experience the ability to breathe underwater. And both of those things are things that you have not experienced before, and they will blow your mind when you try them.
Absolutely. I like coming up from the bottom. So you've been under the water and you're approaching the surface, and it feels like you're entering a new world, but in reverse. Like, we're so used to being on land going into the water. And when you scuba dive, you can be like, whoa, what it would be like to be a fish. Anyway, it's like black magic. It's very cool. Because they've got a horde of questions, I'm going to go back to Mr. Hancock's class live. Come on in with another. Take us away.
Yeah, when you had mentioned cyclones, a lot of kids were wondering, what is a cyclone, and maybe a bit more about how it affects the coral reefs.
Sweet.
Yeah, so in different parts of the world, they call cyclones different things. So some places they call them cyclones. In America, they call them hurricanes or tornadoes. They're similar thing, really. It's a massive, massive storm with huge wind and huge waves. And when that amount of wind and wave energy hits a coral reef, it literally just like breaks everything up and creates massive damage by structures falling over and reefs breaking. Much like hurricanes and tornadoes and cyclones can cause similar damage on land to trees or buildings.
Yeah, I want to harp on this for a second, because coral reefs often serve as a great buffer. They're one of the ecosystem types, like mangroves, that can actually prevent damage coming in from a hurricane or cyclone to the land. So have you seen this in Indonesia? Are there examples of this where a coral reef has helped protect like a city or a town from something like a hurricane?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of good examples of that, where the reef has sort of taken the hit, taken a bit of damage, been able to recover afterwards. And what that's meant is that has prevented any villages or towns or cities on the coastline from being damaged, because the reef has sort of, been like a protective barrier for the coastline. So reefs are really valuable for that. So in areas where hurricanes and cyclones hit frequently, it's really important for them to look after their coral reefs, because it's like nature's defense mechanism against these big storms.
The thing you might see if you sort of get into more technical stuff for our students is nature-based solutions. So a lot of people on the international scale are thinking like, hey, we've got these big challenges. How can some of the things in the natural world protect us from that? And it turns out that for all of human history, needless to say, nature has been really protecting us in ways that we didn't quite acknowledge for a very long time. And now we're going, oh no, we ought to protect the coral reefs and the mangroves and do all this stuff, because it helps the wildlife, but it also helps us in a really, really big way. So I love when we get that topic in. Tim, we had favorite dive site, which is almost like asking your favorite fish. Is there a favorite place to dive?
Yeah, that's right. One of my favorite places is the place in Indonesia where I showed you people regrowing the coral, because I find that just such a wonderfully encouraging place to be, as much as because the reef is beautiful, because the people there have this really wonderful program and this really brilliant determination that they can rebuild a reef and they can make a positive difference. So that's one. Another really cool one would be an underwater cave in a jungle in Mexico, which I dived in once. And you had to take a torch, because you went in through this little hole in what looked like it wasn't a very big cave. It's called a cenote. And that's in the, Jesse's just put that there. And that was a really cool experience. It opened up into this sort of underground network that you could dive around underwater in the jungle. It's really cool.
We've had hundreds of divers on this program, and when we ask them their favorite dive site, it's one of three things. It's either Indonesia and like the Coral Triangle, the most amazing coral place in the world. It's the cenotes in Mexico, or it's British Columbia's coast in Canada with the kelp forest. Like, universally, people pick those three spots. So kids, get your patio open water and then head to those three places in a row. It's well worth it. Tim, we've got one about, is there a coral reef in particular? Is there a place, maybe it's Indonesia where you work, where corals are really making a comeback, like the best story of conservation from them in the world that we know?
Yeah, and that what I find really encouraging is there's lots of stories like that, and that's better than there just being one, right? There's lots of examples around the world of where coral reefs have recovered really well, and sometimes that's because people have come up with ingenious solutions for replanting the corals, or for encouraging the fish population to come back. And sometimes it's because the reef has rebounded really brilliantly well on its own. So yeah, there's lots on every continent. There are encouraging examples of reefs doing better than we think they would. And in fact, there's so many of them that we've got a scientific term for it. We call them bright spots. And bright spots are that's a term we use to describe these ecosystems where they're doing better than everything else surrounding them, and they're real stories of encouragement from which we can learn these ecosystems are doing great.
It's one of my very favorite things in all of conservation, because we do a lot of conservation broadcasts, is to highlight these places, whether it's in rural England where we're rewilding off the coast of Mexico. They have a nature preserve that has become just one of the most bio-rich marine life areas on the planet. Bright spots. I mean, the story for conservation for so long has been, man, we're doing so much to hurt the natural world, and oh, it's going, the sky is falling. And there's a lot that we are doing to hurt the natural world, but there's so much great work being done to save it and bring it back, and communities getting involved. And we always like to highlight those stories because there's a lot to be optimistic and excited about. So thank you for sharing that, Tim. Time flies and you're having fun. We are nearing the end of the broadcast. So I do want to highlight Greenfins is correct. I've got our link right here, so you can check out the Greenfins program. Super, super cool. If you're diving around the world, check that out and choose sustainably while you're out on the reef. And so before we wrap up, is there any final message you want to leave our kids with about corals, about restoration, about anything before we say goodbye?
I think the most important thing is that last question in the quiz, which is the one about reefs being able to recover if we allow them to. And I think you can expand that to all nature and all ecosystems around the world, that whenever you see stories that nature is damaged and environments are in trouble, you've got to remember that this is a reversible trend, that in as much as we're capable of damaging the natural world, we are capable as a society and as individuals with creativity and empathy of rebuilding the world as well.
No better message than that, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us. I think for the 4th time on the broadcast. You can come back anytime you want. I love hanging out with you. We're going to say farewell to our classrooms now. A big thank you to you all for joining us from all around the world. Tim, stick around with me after we're done live, but have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Bye for now, guys.
That was brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Thanks very much for joining us.
Farewell. Farewell.